So meiosis is another form of cell division, and it is specifically only going to make eggs or sperm. So eggs and sperm are gametes that are going to be used in sexual reproduction. So this is going to be how we transmit genes from one generation to the next. So this is the beginning of heredity. How do we get offspring that look more closely related to their parents than they do to other unrelated individuals? And if you've looked at yourself and your parents, you'll probably note that you do indeed look like them. However, you don't look exactly like them. So one of the key important things about transmitting genes from one generation to the next is mixing them up a little bit. You want to pass your genes on, but you want them to have a little bit of variation so that the population is widely varied. So not only is meiosis going to allow us to transmit genes from one generation to the next, it's also going to allow us to create genetic variation, which is extremely important in maintaining the variation within a population. So genetics is the study of heredity and variation, which we will get into in the next unit. So a gene is just a segment of DNA. It usually is going to code for some specific protein, and these are units that are heritable. So we're going to pass our specific genes onto our offspring. However, we may not give them all of our genes. We give them some of our genes, and we might give them some genes from the other parent. And so these are passed through reproductive cells called gametes. So these gametes are sperm and eggs, and our DNA is packaged into linear chromosomes. So again, humans have 46 chromosomes. A sperm cell and an egg cell are haploid, meaning that they're only going to have 23 chromosomes. That way, when you have a sperm and an egg, which each have 23, and they come together to form the next offspring, that's going to have 23 plus 23, which is going to give us our 46 chromosomes that we need to have for body cells. So meiosis is going to be involved in sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is going to involve two parents, and it's going to involve a unique combination of genes. So each parent is going to produce gametes, eggs, or sperm, and those are going to be mixed up in some way to create a unique combination. So unless you have an identical twin who looks exactly like you, if you have a sibling, they look probably slightly different. They might have different eye color, hair color, height, or just different characteristics. And that's because every time parents create eggs and sperm, they get a slightly different combination of genes than the previous offspring. Asexual reproduction is what we already covered in mitosis. So this is a single individual bacteria reproducing by just making copies of itself, or a single body cell creating more body cells. So these are clones. So this was chapter 12. When we look at a set of human chromosomes, and you can see this over here, is called a karyotype, and we do this when we do genetic testing, especially on infants, to see if they're going to have any chromosomal disorders. So you can see that each chromosome is numbered, and most human chromosomes are numbered based on size, and they are paired. So chromosome 1 and chromosome 1. The reason you have 2 of each chromosome is you got 1 from mom, and you got 1 from dad. So for each of these pairs, you got 1 of those chromosomes from your mother, and you got 1 of those chromosomes from your father. These sex chromosomes are over here. So we have 22 pairs of what are called autosomes. So those are the body chromosomes, so they're numbers 1 through 22. And then we have 1 pair of sex chromosomes, and those are the sex-determining chromosomes. In this case, X and Y would create a genetic male, an X and an X would create a genetic female. These pairs are called a homologous pair. So in meiosis, it's going to be important to make sure that the egg or the sperm only gets 1 copy of each chromosome. We don't want to just have a grab bag where we grab 23 chromosomes randomly and give them 2 copies of chromosome 8 and no copies of chromosome 11. So in meiosis, what we're going to do is we're actually going to get these homologous pairs of chromosomes to find each other, and then we're going to split them up from their pair so that we know that each cell is going to get chromosome 1 through 22 and then an X and a Y. So the sex chromosomes determine the genetic sex of the individual. Typically, human females are going to have an X and an X. Typically, human males are going to have an X and a Y. The Y is actually going to determine maleness, so Y has genes on it that trigger the production of male genitalia and male hormones. Again, the remaining 22 pairs are called autosomes. Auto means self. Soma means body. So those are usually going to be associated with all of the different body characteristics that aren't typically related to sex. The X chromosome does have genes on it that are related to things like color blindness and other body chromosomes, as the X chromosome is much larger than the Y chromosome. So again, for each pair, we have one chromosome from each parent. So in the X, let's say we have an X and a Y, this is a homologous pair. We got one of them from mom and one of them from dad. So here we see these cells, diploid and haploid again. A diploid cell has 2 sets of chromosomes. So these are going to be the somatic cells. The somatic cells are a precursor to eggs or sperm. So you have a diploid pre-egg cell and a diploid pre-sperm cell that has 2N that's going to have to go through meiosis to eventually become eggs or sperm. So a somatic human cell is going to have 46 chromosomes. A haploid cell, again, this is going to be our gametes. So this is going to be the eggs or the sperm that we make at the very end of the meiosis process. For a human, these gametes are going to have 23 chromosomes. So from a description of a cell, you should be able to determine if it is haploid or diploid based on how many pairs of chromosomes it has and information about the cell. So if I tell you a cell has an N of 3, that means that it normally, as a diploid cell, 2N would have 6. And as a haploid cell, 1N would have 3 chromosomes. So that's what we're going to use here for our example of just walking through the steps of meiosis. And you can see it has color-coded here. We'll just number these chromosomes 1, chromosome 2, chromosome 3, chromosome 1, chromosome 2, chromosome 3 by size. So it has 2 copies of chromosome 1, one of those from mom, one of them from dad. It has 2 copies here of chromosome 2, and then 2 copies here of chromosome 3. And you can tell that these have been duplicated in preparation for dividing. So this cell here is diploid because it has 2 sets of chromosome. It's got one set of 1, 2, 3, and another set of 1, 2, 3. So 2N equals 6. So let's talk a little bit about the reproductive life cycles. So hopefully you're familiar with the human life cycle and how that happens. So what happens first is we're going to go through meiosis, and we're going to form eggs and sperm. These are our gametes. In the process of forming the next generation, so if you were going to have a baby, you would go through fertilization. So the very first step of fertilization is eggs and sperm's union coming together to form a single cell called a zygote. And the zygote has one set of chromosomes from each parent, which means it has 23 from mom and 23 from dad, which is a total of 46 chromosomes. So is a zygote haploid or diploid? A zygote is going to be a diploid cell. The zygote is then going to produce more cells through mitosis. So the zygote goes through mitosis to form eventually an infant, which is going to be birthed and eventually grow up into a mature adult. Once this infant has grown up into a mature adult, it's going to go through puberty, and at puberty, it's going to go ahead and start making gametes through meiosis, whether it's producing an egg each month or producing sperm cells constantly. Those gametes can then combine with the gametes of a different individual through fertilization and then continue the life cycle. Meiosis is extremely important for maintaining the chromosome number. Meiosis cuts the chromosome number in half. So when we take this adult and we go through meiosis, they're going to go from having 46 chromosomes in a body cell to having only 23 chromosomes in an egg or a sperm cell. And that's important. If we don't cut the number in half, then their offspring would have too many chromosomes. If we just left it at 46, then we would double the number of chromosomes in every generation, and that doesn't work well. You wouldn't have a baby. And so meiosis is important for maintaining the fact that humans have 46 chromosomes. If we don't cut them in half, we don't maintain that number. There are other sexual life cycles, so you're probably most familiar with the human life cycle, which is the animal life cycle, which is what we just went through, where we have gametes, so we might have an egg and a sperm from two different individuals come together and form fertilization. We then create this diploid individual, so you can look at the size of this to see how many cells there are. A really small cell is going to be unicellular. Right, so a sperm is one cell, an egg is one cell. And then a larger cell here is going to be multicellular. So we have a multicellular diploid phase, which is our adult body. And then eventually we go through meiosis to create more eggs or sperm. Plants and algae go through a different type of life cycle called the alternation of generations, where they actually have two different multicellular stages. The big part of like a tree or grass or plants that you're seeing outside are usually this large diploid body, which is called the sporophyte, which creates haploid spores. And then they actually have a haploid body called a gametophyte, which is then going to create haploid gametes. So this would be the eggs or the sperm. You'll go into this alternation in generations in a lot more detail in biology 2, but as far as biology 1, what you really need to know is that animals only have a multicellular diploid stage, whereas plants have a multicellular haploid and diploid stage. So they have two multicellular bodies. The opposite of the animal life cycle is the fungus and then some protists. So think of like mold, bread mold would be a fungus here. They are zygotes for a very short amount of time, so they do not have a large diploid body. Most of what you see as mushrooms or mold are actually a large haploid body. So they have a multicellular haploid phase and a very, very brief single-celled diploid phase. So this is kind of the opposite of the animal life cycle.